Tariffs are nothing new. They've been used as a financial weapon ever since ancient times. And I'd be willing to wager that every single country today implements them to some degree or another, some at higher or lower rates. But they are something that have been part of our daily lives forever. The reason I want to bring them up today is because the incoming presidential administration has increased tariffs as a big part of their plan to help improve the economy. Because anybody that's been paying attention can clearly see that the economy is really struggling, regardless of what picture the media is trying to paint to cover up how bad it is. And the cost of living is just increasing at such a rate that a lot of people are getting really squeezed out. So they're arguing that by putting these tariffs on other countries, like say China, they will be paying the tariffs, and then our economy here in the US will be benefiting from it. Everything in life is a trade-off, okay? So the question is not so much, will this help out Americans? It becomes more of, which Americans will it help out? Because I don't understand when they make the argument that other countries are going to pay for tariffs. Because the only way, let's say, for example, the US were to raise tariffs on China. The only way for China to pay for them would be if US IRS agents were to go over to Chinese ports and collect that money there. Now, is the Chinese government ever going to allow us to go and collect that? No, absolutely not. So the only way to collect it would be to do so in domestic ports here. So our government agents would go to the ports and collect that tax from the importers themselves, and then the importers simply pass that cost down onto the consumer. So it is the consumer of the issuing country that pays for that, not the target country. Um, it's a concept that's so simple, even a simpleton like me can understand this. So I know that the guy who graduated from the Wharton School of Business understands this as well. And actually, this is something that both political parties flip on all the time, because whenever it is their party suggesting raising tariffs, they say other countries will pay for it. But yet when it's the opposing party suggesting raising tariffs, they will argue that no, it's like a tax on our own citizens. And then every few years they just flip back and forth on it, depending on how the political winds blow. And because the average modern person has the attention span of a Labrador, they completely forget that their favorite party, which is in favor of them today, just a few years ago was making the arguments against them. So I don't see how it would help out at all, other than just raising costs on the average citizen. That's just what they always do. Now, another argument that's made for tariffs, probably one of the primary ones, is protection of domestic business. The problem is that historically, it doesn't protect, small and middle class type of businesses. It always just creates monopolies for huge corporations. Americans should be very familiar with this, since tariffs were the primary cause of the War of Secession that happened in the 1860s. I refuse to call it a civil war, because by definition it was not a civil war. A civil war is when two separate factions are fighting in order to take control of the country. But the Confederacy was not interested in taking over power in Washington, D.C. They simply wanted to remove themselves from the Union and just leave peacefully, because they had entered into the Union voluntarily, feeling it was a beneficial union for them. But as time went on, it became clear that the economic benefits were helping the North and not so much the South, so they peacefully wanted to leave. And President Lincoln wanted to retain power over those southern states. So, in order then, rather than just letting them leave peacefully, he ordered the invasion of the South and the murder of 600,000 American citizens. Number one worst president in American history, and it's not even close. But anyways, what was happening was that the government was issuing all kinds of tariffs that were benefiting and protecting northern businesses while the industries in the South were getting boned. So go back yourself and read the Articles of Secession from all 13 states. Not one of them even mentioned slavery as a reason for wanting to secede. It had nothing to do with that. It was all economic. So it wasn't until actually later into the war where the North was losing and Lincoln decided it would be a good idea to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, thinking that by putting out, the thing to release the slaves, that it would cause a slave rebellion, of course, creating chaos for his adversaries. So even to him, it was not an important thing freeing the slaves. It was just a simple tactical ploy for him. Regardless of what your history teachers in the public education system have told you, it simply had nothing to do with slavery. It was all about tariffs. And it also concerns me because we have historical precedents that implementing tariffs can actually cause wars to erupt over it. So there's always unintended consequences that can pop up as a result of these economic policies. I always hear the argument for them again that well, if we don't implement them, other countries are going to implement them on us. But you don't stop a tariff war by starting a tariff war. Just like the other argument, they say, well, we have to institute tariffs to protect ourselves against other countries who are manipulating their currency. Like they say that the Chinese are manipulating their currency. Yeah, well, every government in the world's manipulating their currency. I mean, there is no bigger offender of manipulating your currency than to print it into oblivion the way that the United States is doing, right? So that's just another argument that makes no sense whatsoever. It's very clear to see that when you're raising the costs of goods coming from other countries, what you're doing is reducing competition for those corporations. When they no longer have to compete with other businesses producing cheaper and possibly higher quality goods, it puts no pressure on them to remain efficient. And they end up just with having that monopoly, the quality of their product and services decreases while the prices actually rise. I would love to see an environment in my country where small businesses were allowed to flourish and allowed to do what they do best, which is innovate. It's that competition and drive to compete and make money that causes all the new innovations we get. Uh, they come out with better products, and we, as a result, the consumer, benefit from that increased quality of product, better service, and lower prices. Nothing would make me happier than to see a new small automobile company come out, which could put out a vehicle half the price of the big name guys, and you can drive it for 500,000 miles. But the problem is, in our mercantilist system, that's just never going to happen. So if the goal truly was to help out American business, the way they would do that would be to actually reduce tariffs on incoming imported raw goods, raw materials. Because then that way domestic businesses can be getting these raw materials for cheaper, and it gives them a little bit more play in being able to work and put out a reasonably priced product. And in addition to that, reducing regulations on small businesses. Because if you notice, it's always huge corporations are always in favor of regulating themselves. Now, that may sound counterproductive, but if you think about it, let's say, for instance, the government wanted to put on a regulation requiring every grocery store in the country to make some modification of their store, which would cost 50 grand. Well, Walmart Corporation is going to look at that and say, we can very easily eat that 50 grand cost per store, but our ma and pa competitors would be absolutely crippled by something like that. So then Walmart will actually lobby to get that regulation put on themselves because they know it will help create a monopoly for themselves by putting smaller competitors out of business. So if they can just reduce the tariffs on raw materials and reduce regulations on small businesses, not only would the small businesses bloom in the country, which would of course be beneficial, but then it would put more pressure onto the corporations to also have to respond to that competition and improve themselves. It would force them to come up with higher quality products, better service, and lower prices in order to compete. Now, inevitably, somebody's going to come on here and say, no, you're wrong. I just saw an expert on Fox News that said that tariffs are going to reduce costs for people. Okay, well, I mean, since 2020, we've been told to trust the health experts and follow the science. We're told to trust the experts in educating our children. How's that working out? We're told to trust the experts in the quality of our food, like from the USDA. The section of government that tells us that backyard chicken eggs and vegetables grown in our own garden are unsafe to eat, yet they'll then put their stamp of approval on McDonald's, Doritos, Mountain Dew, and Warp Speed mRNA injections. So if you want to keep trusting the experts, go right ahead. It's your life. Do whatever you wish. For myself, I'm going to trust what I can see with my own eyes and what actually makes logical sense. Because I'm not under any false impression that anything I say here is going to change the implementation of tariffs, right? Nobody cares what I have to say, and whatever they are going to do, they're just going to go ahead and do it regardless. But my hope is that the viewers here can take away, even if you can just take away one thing from this, it's just understanding that in the future, whenever a politician is suggesting increasing tariffs, what it really is they want to implement taxes on you indirectly without having to tell you that you're being taxed, because taxes are obviously very unpopular when they're thrown on people. So they can call it tariffs and say that other countries are paying for it while you're the one that's paying the bill on it. And sure, you can always point to a few items out there where prices will actually go down, because next year we could have a really exceptional crop of wheat, which would then lower prices of wheat and wheat-based products. We could find some gigantic deposit of a mineral, which is very easy to mine, and that would reduce the cost of that. Things like those happen regardless of bad economic policy. So there'll always be some things that will go down in price. But when tariffs are increased, it is a guarantee that over the next 4 years, it will cause your general cost of living to increase. That's just the way it is. And that's not even counting, what the consequences that come from all the inflation, which is on the way from years and years of excessive money printing. So just understand that if you're armed with the information that increased tariffs will increase costs for you, the consumer, being armed with that information allows you to prepare yourself and your family to respond for incoming increased prices.